fog clung to my skin like a second layer, cold and unyielding as we moved through its dense embrace. Each breath I took was an effort, the mist creeping into my lungs, whispering secrets of the unknown. The others were shadows, flitting at the edge of my vision, their forms distorted by the swirling vapors that had become our world. We stumbled upon it almost by accident. An old building, its structure a skeleton of what once was, groaning under the weight of time and neglect. A faint light flickered from within, the only sign of life in this desolate landscape. It beckoned us, a siren call of warmth and potential sanctuary, or perhaps a trap set by the very thing we sought to escape. "Look," Sam's voice trembled. "There's light." Indeed there was, but it was the kind of light that didn't promise safety. Instead, it hinted at secrets, at truths hidden in the shadows. In the depths of the fog, it was a lighthouse guiding lost ships to rocky shores, irresistible yet fraught with peril. We converged towards the dilapidated building, each of us drawn by our own reasons, curiosity, desperation, or maybe the simple human urge to seek out any pinprick of light in the overwhelming dark. As we approached, the building's broken windows gaped like open wounds, the light within flickering like the heartbeat of something alive. "Careful," Jasper warned, his voice a low growl that cut through the silence. I nodded, my heart pounding in rhythm with the light that pulsated before us. We were survivors, yes, but also pawns in a game played by a fog that knew our fears better than we did ourselves. With each step towards that uncertain glow, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into the very heart of our nightmares. My fingers traced the contours of a hidden latch, cold and unyielding against my touch. A soft click echoed through the room as the panel gave way, revealing a staircase that spiraled into darkness. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay, and I could feel the weight of the earth above us pressing down like an ominous premonition. "Down here," I whispered, my voice barely piercing the silence that enveloped us. We descended, the beams from our flashlights cutting swaths through the oppressive gloom, revealing a subterranean chamber shrouded in neglect. Dust motes danced in the artificial light, and cobwebs draped the walls like tattered curtains. It appeared untouched by time, a relic of a world that had moved on without it. An underground laboratory. Dr. Whitmore's voice held a note of reverence, her eyes reflecting the scientist's hunger for discovery even amongst the dread. She ran her hand along a workbench strewn with archaic equipment, the layer of dust undisturbed until her fingers carved a path through it. "Someone was searching for answers here," she murmured, more to herself than to us. Her gaze lingered on the faded labels of test tubes and beakers, remnants of experiments long since abandoned. It was then that a shadow detached itself from the corner of the room. My heart lurched into my throat as a figure stepped forward, materializing from the obscurity as if conjured by our very presence. The woman was gaunt, her features etched with lines of exhaustion and something darker, a personal torment that seemed almost palpable. "Dr. Emily Carter," she introduced herself, though her name carried the weight of a confession. Her eyes wide and haunted, darted between us, as if unsure whether we were real or just figments of the fog that sought to claim her sanity. "Did you create all this?" Sam asked, his voice betraying a hint of awe mingled with caution. He gestured around the lab, taking in the chaos of scientific pursuit left to rot. Dr. Carter nodded slowly, her lips pressed together like a grim line. "I've been chasing the truth, but it's a truth that eludes me still." Her hands were trembling, whether from fear or determination, I couldn't tell. "Chasing the truth about what?" Jesper queried, his tone edged with skepticism. Dr. Carter opened her mouth as if to respond, then closed it again, sealing her secrets within. She seemed to wrestle with invisible chains, bound by knowledge too harrowing to share or perhaps too dangerous. In that moment, I understood that whatever haunted Dr. Carter was more than just the fog. It was the burden of enlightenment, the curse of seeing beyond the veil. "Can you help us understand the fog?" Dr. Whitmore pressed gently, her analytical mind grappling with the unknown variables that lay before us. "We need to know what we're dealing with." The doctor's gaze flickered, and I saw something shift behind those fearful eyes. A shard of resolve glinted in the depths of her despair, a spark that might kindle a flame of hope or ignite our ruin. I wasn't sure which. "Understanding is not the end," Dr. Carter said, her voice a mere breath. "But it is where we begin." A shudder ran through the dilapidated room as Dr. Carter stepped forward, her silhouette merging with the flickering shadows cast by our lone flashlight. The laboratory's air, thick with dust and despair, pressed against my skin like an unwelcome shroud. "Years," she whispered, her voice a haunting echo in the silence. "I've watched it, studied it. This fog." Her fingers danced in the air, sketching invisible patterns only we could see. "It's sentient, alive in a way that defies our understanding of life." I drew in a breath, tasting the stagnant air of the underground tomb we found ourselves in. Dr. Whitmore leaned in, her sharp eyes dissecting every tremor in Dr. Carter's face, every haunted look that crossed it. "Sentient?" Dr. Whitmore echoed, her skepticism clashing with the creeping dread that gnawed at the edges of her composure. Dr. Carter nodded, her haunted expression etched with the weight of revelations too terrible to bear alone. "It thinks, feels. It feeds on us, our fears, our emotions." She paused, her gaze piercing the dimness to settle upon each of us. "The fog is no mere weather pattern. It's a predator, and we are its prey." The survivors around me shifted uneasily, the gravity of her words pulling us further into the abyss. We were not just fighting for survival against an amorphous mist, but a conscious entity that sought to consume us from within. "Experimentation has revealed disturbing truths," Dr. Carter continued, her voice a low hum that resonated with the lab's cold surfaces. "The more we fear, the stronger it becomes. Our vulnerabilities are its nourishment, and it is growing, endlessly spreading." "Spreading?" I questioned, my throat tight with the rising panic her words invoked. "Beyond the town, beyond any borders we know," she confirmed, her eyes wide with the horror of her own findings. "Our emotions ripple through it, expanding its reach like a plague. If we cannot find a way to sever its connection to us, to our very souls, it will envelop everything." The revelation hung in the air, a specter more terrifying than any ghostly figure the fog might conjure. Dr. Whitmore's hand went to her mouth, her scientific resolve visibly shaken as she grappled with the notion of an enemy that defied all logic. "Then we must stop it," she said, her voice betraying a hint of desperation. "We must end this nightmare." "Indeed," Dr. Carter agreed solemnly. "But how does one battle a force that dwells within the very fabric of your psyche?" The question lingered, unanswered, as we stood in the oppressive gloom of the hidden laboratory, united by a chilling resolve and the shared torment of knowing we faced an adversary unlike any other, an adversary that thrived on the darkest corners of our human experience. The air hung heavy with dust and the musty scent of decay as we combed through the remnants of Dr. Carter's life's work. Her laboratory, a mausoleum of scientific endeavor, sprawled around us in neglected chaos. My hands, trembling ever so slightly, brushed against the brittle pages scattered across the wooden desk. They were filled with meticulous diagrams that mapped out the fog's labyrinthine reach, tentacles of influence extending into the psyche, like a web spun by a malevolent arachnid. "Look at this," I murmured to no one in particular, tracing my finger over a sequence of notes so dense they seemed to blur together. The diagrams depicted human silhouettes ensnared by spectral tendrils, each line annotated with a precise clinical detail that belied the horrors they represented. Dr. Whitmore leaned in beside me, her eyes scanning the pages with an intensity that mirrored my own. She was searching for logic in the illogical, order in the chaos. "Extraordinary," she whispered, though whether in awe or terror, I couldn't tell. "This suggests a level of sentience, a tactical manipulation of our fears." Dr. Carter watched us from the shadows, her silhouette sharp against the flickering light of a lone candle. "It is not merely a question of what the fog is," she said, her voice cutting through the stillness, "but rather what it wants. It yearns to occupy more than just the space around us. It craves dominion over the landscape of our minds." I felt Dr. Whitmore stiffen beside me at the implication. The fog, a predator of the mind, was an adversary against which her scientific acumen offered no shield. "Manifesting fears? Darkest secrets?" I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. The concept was like a poison, seeping doubt into the well of my resolve. "Indeed." Dr. Carter's tone was grave, her words measured. "To survive, you must confront what lies within. The specters of your past, the phantoms of your regrets. They are the weapons it will wield with cruel precision." A shiver ran down my spine as the weight of her warning settled upon us. The thought of facing the twisted reflections of my own inner turmoil was more daunting than any physical threat. In that moment, I understood the true nature of our enemy. It was not enough to simply evade. We had to engage in a battle far more intimate and treacherous. "Then we shall prepare ourselves," I stated, the resolve in my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. Dr. Whitmore nodded, though the shadows seemed to cling to her as if seeking to smother the flame of her scientific rationality. The silence that had settled over us was oppressive, a tangible weight that threatened to crush our spirits as much as any physical barrier could. With each exchange of fearful glances, I felt the frayed edges of our resolve begin to tear. The apparitions we'd seen in the fog, pale faces devoid of any eyes, mouths agape in silent screams, and formless shadows that seemed to reach for us with longing, were more than any mere tricks of the light. They were manifestations of the fog's sentient malice. "Escaping it," I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper, "means understanding it." "Unraveling its secrets," Dr. Whitmore added, her tone clinical, yet laced with an undercurrent of something darker, perhaps fear or maybe despair. It was disconcerting to hear such emotions from a woman who regarded the world through the lens of logic and empirical evidence. She met my gaze, her sharp eyes reflecting the ghostly dance of candlelight against the walls of the dilapidated building. "Exactly," Dr. Carter said, emerging from the shadows like a specter herself. "And I may have found a way to do just that." Her fingers trembled slightly as she retrieved a small, intricate device from the folds of her coat. "This," she began, her haunted expression giving way to one of fierce determination, "is capable of disrupting the fog's influence over our minds." I stepped closer, squinting in the dim light to examine the device. It was a labyrinthine assembly of wires and crystals, its design both alien and oddly beautiful. My heart thrummed in my chest, a mixture of hope and skepticism, as I considered the implications of her claim. "But it requires power," Dr. Carter continued, a shadow crossing her features, "a rare and powerful energy source that is hidden in the very heart of the town." "Which means," Dr. Whitmore interjected, her analytical mind piecing together the unspoken conclusion, "we must venture back into the fog." Indeed. Dr. Carter's lips pressed into a thin line. The fog will try to stop us. It will prey on our vulnerabilities, twist our perceptions, and conjure horrors designed to turn us away. Or turn us against each other, I added, the thought hanging heavy in the air between us. It was not just the physical journey that filled me with dread, but the psychological gauntlet we would undoubtedly face. The isolation, the grief that had become our constant companions, now took on new significance. We were not merely survivors of a catastrophic event. We were combatants in a war against an entity that sought to unravel the very fabric of our sanity. Then we move forward with caution, Dr. Whitmore stated, her voice steady despite the gravity of our situation. We must trust in our resolve and in the science that has brought us this far. Let's gather what we need, Dr. Carter said, her hands meticulously securing the device within her coat once more. Time is not on our side. With a collective breath that felt like the first after a long submersion in deep waters, we prepared to step back into the suffocating embrace of the fog. The somber rhythm of our movements, the careful checks of flashlights and supplies, all served as a prelude to the uncertainty that awaited us beyond the relative safety of decaying walls. The fog loomed, an ever-present threat that promised to test the limits of our courage and our minds as we ventured toward the heart of the town, and perhaps the heart of the mystery itself. I nodded, my throat constricted by the gravity of our pact. We'll help you, I affirmed, giving voice to the resolve that bound us all to Dr. Carter's desperate quest. The others murmured their assent, the sound of it as solemn as a vow. Our lives hinged on the retrieval of that elusive energy source, hidden somewhere in the town. We turned away from the lab's forlorn relics, our steps deliberate, each one a silent drumbeat marching us toward an uncertain fate. There was a meticulousness to our preparation, a methodical inventory of resources both material and mental. I watched Dr. Whitmore's hands, clinical and precise, as she examined her equipment, her expression betraying nothing of the turmoil I knew churned beneath her composed surface. The air within the building seemed to press against us, heavy with portents of doom. My breaths came slow and measured, like drawing in the weight of the world with every inhalation. We were all too aware of the fog's insidious growth and power, its tendrils creeping into the crevices of our minds with sinister patience. Remember, Dr. Carter's voice cut through the quiet, her eyes scanning each of us. The fog feeds on fear. We must guard our thoughts as closely as our bodies. Her words hung between us, spectral and foreboding. A shiver traced the length of my spine as I considered her warning. This mist was more than a mere climatic anomaly. It was a sentient darkness, an entity that reveled in the psychological torment of its victims. The thought of confronting not just the physical, but also the mental manifestations of this phenomenon was chilling. Dr. Whitmore closed her weathered case with a click that echoed like the closing of a coffin lid. She caught my gaze, her eyes sharp with intellect and the unspoken understanding that logic was our shield in a battle against the illogical. "We are more than the sum of our fears," she stated, her tone a mix of command and comfort. We positioned ourselves at the threshold of the building, the fog awaiting us like a living, breathing adversary. It swirled outside, a miasma of despair that promised a gauntlet of horrors. Yet there was no turning back. We had come too far, lost too much, to surrender now to the oppressive grip of the fog. "Let's move out," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. And with that, we stepped over the imperceptible line that separated the known from the unknowable. Into the fog we walked, our hearts encased in armor wrought from desperation and determination, ready to confront whatever lay hidden in the whispering mist. The beam of my flashlight cut a narrow swath through the heavy mist, its light flickering as if struggling against the press of unseen hands. My breath came in shallow rasps, condensing instantly in the chill that clung to the air like a wet shroud. The fog seemed to swallow sound itself, muffling our footsteps and casting us into a world where reality blurred at the edges. Jasper moved ahead, his figure looming and indistinct. His broad shoulders were tense, the line of his jaw set in grim determination. His eyes, those piercing pools of blue, scanned the obscurity around us with an intensity that bordered on obsession. I knew he felt it too, the weight of the fog, oppressive and intent, as if the very atmosphere sought to crush our spirits. "Keep close," he murmured, voice barely audible over the dense silence. Rose was to my left, her small frame nearly lost in the haze. Her hand found mine, her grip tight, and I could feel the tremble in her fingers. It was not just the cold that made her shiver. Rose, ever the flame-haired dynamo, was facing a tempest that could not be quelled by sheer force of will alone. "Something's not right," she whispered, her voice threaded with unease. Dr. Whitmore's silhouette drifted behind us, her silver hair a faint gleam in the gloom. She clutched her instruments, tools of logic in a realm that defied comprehension. Her presence was a bastion of scientific resolve, yet I sensed the fissures in her composure, the creeping doubt that gnawed at her empirical armor. "Stay focused," she advised, her tone clinical, yet not devoid of concern. "Observe changes in the temperature, shifts in the density of the fog." We moved with painstaking care, the silence punctuated only by the crunch of our boots on the neglected road. Every shadow birthed suspicion, every sound a potential harbinger of doom. I could feel it, the inescapable sensation of being watched by a multitude of unseen gazes. It gnawed at the edges of my consciousness, a parasite feeding on paranoia. "Something's following us," Pete said, his voice hoarse with fear. "Or someone," Sam added, the hint of a sob betraying her attempt at bravery. Detective Bradford's figure cut through the tension, his posture rigid with authority. "Don't let it get inside your head. That's what it wants," he commanded, though even his ironclad demeanor couldn't mask the undercurrent of dread that laced his words. The fog seemed to respond to our fears, growing denser, more constrictive. Each breath felt like the drawing of a mouthful of cotton, thick and cloying. Our flashlights' beams became mere splinters of light in the overwhelming darkness, fragile lifelines tethering us to sanity. "Keep moving," I muttered, more to myself than the others. "Just keep moving." A single discordant chime of a distant bell fractured the silence. My pulse throbbed in my ears, each beat a Morse code of mounting dread. The frigid air bit at my cheeks, and I realized I was holding my breath, a child's futile defense against the dark. Exhaling a cloud of vapor, I watched it melt into the all-consuming gray. "Did you hear that?" whispered Sam, her voice barely carrying over the ethereal hush that enveloped us. "Shh," I cautioned, my gaze scanning the nebulous forms that seemed to dance at the edge of our vision. A stark fear gripped me, as if icy fingers had wrapped around my heart, squeezing with an intent both curious and malevolent. Pete halted abruptly, his flashlight beam trembling. "There!" he pointed, his finger quivering in the cold. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath, and then we saw it. The ghostly figure, a silhouette etched against the opacity of the fog. Two orbs glowed within the shadows, unwavering and intense, like stars burning through the veil of the night. They were eyes that knew no warmth, no mercy, eyes that reflected a nightmarish luminescence. Detective Bradford stiffened beside me. "God help us," he murmured under his breath, his usual composure splintering before the specter's unrelenting gaze. The apparition did not move, yet its stillness was more menacing than the most violent tempest. It felt as though the fog itself was congealing, taking form to communicate the will of the entity that thrived within its embrace. "Emily said it feeds on our fears," Sam said, her voice a haunted echo of itself. "It's growing stronger." I understood then the ghostly figure was but an emissary, the fog's way of reminding us of our insignificance. We were mere motes of dust, caught in the gaze of a cosmic entity indifferent to our struggle, our humanity. "Focus," I whispered, gripping my flashlight like a lifeline back to reality. "We need the energy source. Without it..." No one dared finish the thought. We knew what lay ahead without the device Dr. Carter had spoken of, a descent into madness from which there would be no return. "Let's keep moving," Detective Bradford commanded, his resolve wrapping around us like a shield against despair. With every step, the oppressive weight of the fog bore down upon us, as if to crush us beneath its insidious power. Yet, amidst this cruel ballet of fear and defiance, a sliver of hope persisted, a hope that was as fragile and vital as a candle flame in the void. The ghostly figure waded back into the murk, its haunting presence a promise of the trials to come. We pressed forward, our collective will a bulwark against the encroaching darkness. "Stay together," I said. "The energy source. We find that, and we fight back." Our path was labyrinthine, a twisted echo of the town we once knew, but the glowing eyes would not vanish from my mind's eye. Their otherworldly intensity, a specter that loomed over us, a chilling reminder that the entity was watching, waiting, and drawing ever nearer.